The wind was a thief, stealing the last of the autumn warmth and scouring the valley with the grit of coming winter. It whipped Alara's thin shawl against the swell of her belly, a constant, chilling reminder of her vulnerability. She stood apart from the small crowd gathered in her own yard, a stranger at the dismantling of her life. Each crack of the auctioneer's gavel was a splinter in her soul. The familiar, worn grain of her rocking chair, the chipped enamel of her washbasin, the sturdy pine table her husband, Thomas, had built with his own hands. All of it scattered, sold for coins that would never fill the emptiness they left behind. She was a spectacle of quiet ruin. The townspeople of Redemption Creek watched with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They saw a woman undone by fate, her husband taken by the fever a season ago, leaving her with nothing but his debts and the child growing within her. The air was thick with their murmurs and the cloying scent of dust and dying leaves. Alara kept her gaze fixed on the hard-packed earth, tracing the cracks as if they were a map of her own breaking heart. Despair was a cold, heavy stone in her gut, pressing down on the life that still fluttered beneath it. She had nothing left to offer this child, not even a roof. Then, the auctioneer, a sharp-faced man named Finch with eyes like a scavenging crow, gestured to what remained. The small, mortgaged plot of land, the dilapidated cabin she called home, and a final, pathetic lot of personal effects lumped together in a crate. Inside that crate, nestled amongst a few tattered linens and a tarnished silver locket, was a small leather bag. It was her only true possession. It held Thomas's last letter, a lock of his hair, and the tiny, carved wooden bird he had made for their baby. It was the entire history of her love, the anchor of her memory. Her eyes lifted, scanning the faces in the crowd. They were hungry, eager for the bargain of her destitution. All except one. At the very back, leaning against the weathered fence post, stood a man who seemed carved from the mountain itself. Silas Blackwood. He was a giant, broad-shouldered and silent, a rancher from the high, lonely country whom most folk feared and avoided. He was not a man of the town. His presence was an anomaly, a dark, unreadable shape against the pale sky. He wasn't bidding, merely watching. His gaze as steady and unsettling as a hawk's. A tremor of a different kind of fear, colder and sharper than despair, went through her. He was an unknown quantity in an equation that had already calculated her ruin. Finch began the bidding for the land, her home, her last bastion against the world. The price was insultingly low, and a local merchant with a predatory smile began to bid with smug confidence. The gavel was rising. Alara felt the world tilt, the cold earth seeming to fall away beneath her feet. The merchant's final bid hung in the frigid air, triumphant and cruel. Finch's eyes gleamed as he raised his gavel, a predator savoring the kill. Sold to Mr. Gable for. But the word died on his lips. Alara had moved. It was a single, staggering step forward, an act of will that cost her everything. The crowd parted before her as if she were a ghost. Her hand was pressed to her belly, a desperate, protective gesture. Her voice, when it came, was a raw whisper that carried on the wind. Please, all eyes turned to her. Finch's face curdled with annoyance. The auction is concluded, madam, she ignored him. Her gaze was fixed on the mountain of a man at the back of the crowd. Silas Blackwood had not moved, but his attention, once passive, was now a palpable force, directed entirely at her. Please, she repeated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength born of utter desperation. She pointed a trembling finger toward the crate. The bag. Just leave me the bag, a nervous titter went through the onlookers. Such a small, pathetic request. Take the land, she pleaded, her eyes burning with unshed tears, locked on Silas. Take it all, but let me keep the bag, he said nothing. His expression was stone. She thought he would turn away, dismiss her like all the others. The hope that had flared so unexpectedly began to gutter. Panic seized her. She would not lose this. She could not. My baby is coming, she cried out, the words tearing from her throat, raw and broken. Please leave the bag. Or buy me. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The offer was scandalous, a remnant of a harsher time. Buy my debt, my indenture. I will work it off. Just let me keep what's inside. For a long moment, the only sound was the mournful cry of the wind. Finch looked appalled, Gable triumphant. Alara stood exposed, her dignity stripped away, offering the only thing she had left, her own servitude. Then Silas Blackwood pushed himself off the fence. He did not look at her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, like stones shifting deep in the earth. I will double Gable's offer. As stunned silence fell. Gable's jaw dropped. Finch stammered, Sir. The bidding was closed. Double it? Silas repeated, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. He took 2 long strides forward, his shadow falling over the auctioneer. Finch, visibly intimidated, flinched and nodded dumbly. Sold, he squeaked, his voice thin. To Mr. Blackwood, Silas stepped past him, his gaze sweeping over the deed before he signed it. Then he walked to the crate, his large, calloused hands moving with surprising gentleness as he reached inside and retrieved the small leather bag. The crowd held its breath. He walked directly to Alara, stopping before her. He towered over her, yet he seemed to take up less space, his presence no longer threatening but solid, a wall against the wind. Without a word, he pressed the soft, worn leather into her trembling hands. Then he turned and strode toward his horse, leaving her clutching her salvaged heart as the townspeople stared, baffled and silent. The days that followed were steeped in a profound and unnerving quiet. Alara remained in the cabin, now a tenant on her own land, beholden to a man she did not know. She expected a knock on the door, a summons, a list of duties to begin the servitude she had offered. None came. Silas Blackwood was a ghost. She would see him sometimes from her window, a distant figure on horseback surveying the perimeter of the property, as remote and impenetrable as the granite peaks he called home. He never approached the cabin, but his presence was felt. One morning, she opened the door to find a sack of flour and a slab of smoked bacon on the porch step. Another day, it was a bundle of firewood, neatly stacked and dry. He mended the broken fence that bordered the small yard and, one afternoon while she rested, she heard the steady, rhythmic knock of a hammer and later saw that the loose shutter on the north window had been firmly secured. These were acts of provision, not possession. They were silent, practical gestures that spoke a language she was slowly beginning to understand. It was the language of survival, of quiet decency in a world that had offered her none. Still, she was afraid. She was a woman alone, indebted to a man of immense physical power and a fearsome reputation. The whispers in town had always painted him as a savage, a man who had turned his back on society. Yet his actions contradicted the stories. He was not her master. He was her guardian. The trust grew tentatively, a fragile seedling in the hard soil of her fear. She began to watch for him, her gaze drawn to the horizon, a part of her reassured by the sight of his distant, solitary form. The confrontation, when it came, was not with the man, but with the sky. Winter arrived not with a gentle dusting of snow, but with a roar. The wind shrieked like a banshee, hurling ice and snow against the thin walls of the cabin. The world beyond her small window panes dissolved into a churning vortex of white. The fire in the hearth sputtered, fighting a losing battle against the drafts that snaked through every chink in the old wood. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in her belly. She was trapped, alone with the storm and the ever more insistent movements of her child. As darkness fell, the cabin groaned under the assault. A sudden, violent gust of wind rattled the door in its frame with such force that the latch splintered. The door flew open, and the storm surged inside, a blast of Arctic fury that extinguished the lamp and sent embers scattering from the hearth. Alara cried out, stumbling back as she fought to push the door against the unyielding power of the wind. And then, a shape filled the opening, blocking the blizzard. It was Silas. He was a colossus of snow and shadow, his greatcoat white with ice. He shouldered the door shut with impossible ease, the sound of the storm instantly muffled. He slid a heavy iron poker through the brackets, securing it. He didn't speak. He moved directly to the hearth, his large frame casting dancing shadows as he knelt. With steady, capable hands, he coaxed the dying embers back to life, adding logs from the woodpile he himself had left until a robust, roaring fire pushed back the cold and the dark. He then retreated to the far corner of the room, near the door, and sat on an overturned crate, a silent, unmoving sentinel against the storm. When the first pale light of dawn filtered through the window, it revealed a world transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound silence and a landscape buried in pristine, white snow. The air in the cabin was warm. The fire still crackled softly in the hearth. Silas sat in the same spot he had occupied all night, his posture unchanged. He had been her guardian through the darkness, a silent bulwark against the fury of the elements. Alara rose slowly, her body stiff. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, dawning certainty. She poured the last of her water into a small pot and set it over the fire to boil, adding a pinch of the precious tea leaves she'd been saving. When it was steeped, she poured it into her only 2 mugs. She walked over to him and held one out. He looked at the mug, then up at her face. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes beyond that stoic reserve. A weariness, perhaps, or a flicker of surprise. He took the mug, his large, rough fingers brushing against hers. It was the first time they had touched. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He did not seem like a man of many words. She returned to her chair by the fire, cradling her own warm mug. The silence between them was no longer heavy with uncertainty, but comfortable, companionable. "I knew your husband," he said, his voice a low rumble that startled her. "We traded sometimes." He was a good man. Alara looked at him, her heart aching with a bittersweet pang. "He was," she whispered. Silas took a slow sip of the tea. "No man's child," he stated, looking toward the small, empty cradle by the hearth. Should start with nothing. In that simple declaration, she understood everything. It was not pity that had moved him at the auction, but a code of honor she hadn't known still existed. He had not bought her, nor her servitude. He had secured her home, her future, her child's first safe harbor. He had done it out of respect for the dead and duty to the living. He finished his tea and stood, his great height seeming to shrink the small room. He moved to the door, removing the poker that barred it. "The snow is deep. I will be back with more supplies," he said. It was not a question or a command, but a statement of fact. He was not abandoning her. Alara stood as well, one hand resting on the swell of her belly. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, wanting to find the words to express the immense gratitude that filled her. "Silas," he corrected her gently, his back still to her. Then he stepped out into the blinding white sunlight and was gone. Alara walked to the open door, watching his broad back as he trudged through the deep snow, a solitary, steadfast figure carving a path in a new world. The landscape, which had once seemed so hostile and threatening, now held a quiet promise. The cold air she breathed in felt clean, hopeful. She was not a victim. She was not destitute. She was a woman on the cusp of motherhood, with a home, a protector, and a strength she had not known she possessed. She had faced the end of her world and found, in the unlikeliest of souls, a new beginning.